into this moment is, for the first time in our generation, this has been a moment of abundance. There is an abundance of resources that are available. And in real time, it doesn't matter if you are a community-based organization, if you are a mayor from a small town in York, you are trying to figure out this money the same way that the feds are trying to figure out this money. And the rules have not been written. So hold and sit into that. The other thing that we have to hold is that in order to make sure that these resources don't land the way that they have historically on Black, brown, and indigenous communities, and how they had landed on us. So you heard earlier how infrastructure dollars have often been weaponized against our communities. Blood, sweat, and tears is a very real thing. We are always at the front line of like how these resources then roll themselves out. But this abundance is juxtaposed to a system that allows for extraction and allows for the weaponization of these resources. So we will have to be creative. We will have to build the necessary relationships to imagine and put something different in place. So that's like general context. But then we're in the South, okay? And I mentioned yesterday, the South has a uniqueness to themselves in that whenever we are able to go 2 steps forward, they figure out a system to make us go 10 feet back. And in this moment when we talk about abundance, we have to hold the realities of what is at play within especially the South. We have governors who have been public around, we're not even gonna take the money, so y'all go do whatever you wanna do with yourselves, we're not gonna take the money. Or better yet, we will take the money, but we are gonna leverage something called preemption. And we're gonna use that money the way we wanna use it, and if anyone is doing anything outside of what we deem as necessary, we're gonna preempt it and claw back the resources. That is a very real thing. I wanna be able to introduce this panel now because what they will be sitting in this conversation and bringing forth to you is talking about the infrastructure that needs to be in place in order to navigate the realities that everybody lives with, especially in the South. Talk about what they've been doing in order to navigate those resources in a creative way and building relationships that actually allow them to traverse what happens at the state level, but also providing some context of like what the realities are. So with that, I would love to introduce the panel. First, we will have Marcus Bass from the North Carolina Black Alliance, who is also a co-host, speak around preemption and what it means for this region and what the challenges have been. Next, we have David Bender from the Pinellas, thank you, Pinellas Community Foundation in Florida. Philanthropy has attempted to step into the void to navigate some of these resources and to actually be in right relationship with community to make sure that those dollars land in a good way, and David will talk about that. Then we have Ajulo Othow. I always do this to your last name. Othow. Thank you, Ajulo Othow, who is with, they had a whole nother organization. Do I say the Solutions? Which one did you say? EnerWealth. Okay, thank you, EnerWealth Solutions. I only say that because this is a bad boss that holds like many hats, so. And Ajulo will be talking about, I want her to actually sit into the legacy of the work that she's done in order to put in and elevate other infrastructure to move money, specifically the utilities. And when we think about like the rural electric co-ops, which play such a role within the South, they potentially are a pathway to moving money in a different way, but making sure that that is a democratized system has been very much her life's work, and talk about your other stuff, but that's all right. And then last is Irene Marion, who is from the U.S. Department of Transportation, Office of Civil Rights. And we asked her to take sort of like the pinch hitting spot at the end because of this piece around accountability. You heard earlier, like the feds are the money and the feds are the accountability. So when these dollars flow and when governors act crazy, what are the mechanisms that we have in place in order to hold accountability for community and for place? So with that, I would love to, we're gonna start with Marcus, and ask Marcus to share a little bit about the work that North Carolina Black Alliance has been doing, and how you're sitting in this moment when you think about the abundance of resources, but the realities of preemption. Like, how do we navigate that?
First, giving honor to God, because she is awesome. And secondly,
Thank you. I'm gonna get your name right now.
I say that because one of the key institutions that we have needed before government intervention, or even with government intervention, has been the Black church. We are in here, not just in an economic formation, but in a freedom formation, in a liberation formation. And one thing that is evident by the faces that I've seen over the past 2 days, which has been amazing, this is almost like if I close my eyes and think, I feel like I'm in Martha's Vineyard back this summer when everybody was together there. This kind of gives that same experience. I'm gonna tell my kids it wasn't Martha's Vineyard because I can't afford to be there. So Martha's Vineyard is in Durham. Don't care what anybody says. But when we talk about this notion of understanding how to intervene when government is slow to act, it has been the Black church. We are in the Bible Belt for a reason. Now, this is not a conversation to convert anyone here. That's for another panel, another day, and another group of people. But what I think we need to recognize is the mobilizing factor that the church has always played in providing relief when government just wasn't enough. They asked for a 10%, and you can argue where it goes to, or what kind of car your pastor drives. In response for that investment, there is an expectation that the church provides. At first, it was hush harbors. We had to go by the river and figure out how to liberate ourselves. And almost in that same formation, here we are again at the river. One of the things that the Black Alliance works to do is to be a conduit for everyday people, Black residents in particular, to access government. For a lot of different reasons, folks don't understand that the number one goal of a politician is to do what? To get reelected, not to support the constituents that they serve completely. Now, I'm not making a blanket statement because I know there may be some elected officials in here, but by and large, we know that there has always been an intentional aspect of democracy to keep folks in office, and then also to marginalize power for certain communities. Now, I think in this case, when we look at what the Black Alliance tries to do, a lot of times around voting, we want to engage people, but then we don't unpack all the other tools in democracy. And so one of the underlying reasons why we wanted to be a part of this space is because in a lot of ways, this is the choir, and then the choir also has to get in tune. Elected officials, private partnerships, our foundations, all of this works in a symbiotic relationship. And for North Carolina, for a long time, we have done this in a very organic way, right? When you think about, we're at the 125th commemoration of the Wilmington Massacre. When you look at where we have gone and where we are coming back to, in that very real sense, it was a coalition of people that ended up moving the governmental system. Now, here we are still trying to figure out how to parse out this top-down notion, this trickle-down notion of government, when in all honesty, instead of holding the pail to trickle down, we need to be making sure we're unjamming the clog. And so in a lot of cases, the lived experience of the folks in this room, the leaders that really should be in elected office, we don't have the time to sit into a city council meeting or sit in a board of education meeting, or even we don't even want to go or don't have the time to go to a board of election meeting when we're talking about voting spaces in our community. However, there has to be a conduit, and it can't always be an elected official because we just discussed what the main goal of an elected official is. And so from our standpoint, there are several key Black institutions: the institution of faith, our academic institutions, our civic and service organizations like the NAACP, the National Council for Negro Women, and then the Divine Nine. When you name all of those organizations out, you have a 100-county operating system. But when you divide those, you marginalize your power. when one group is only talking to another group and you're inviting your elected official here and an elected official has to go there, that coordination or that division ends up us marginalizing our power. When we're all talking about the same thing, I don't care how rich you are or how poor you are in community, we are talking about the exact same issue. And so what we try to do is create space in community for folks to have what we call county table conversations to engage at that level. And then we also work at the very top level of government, working with our elected officials. The organization was first called the Alliance of North Carolina Black Elected Officials, and then they realized about 10 years ago that leadership was not just in the elected class. And there are individuals in community that we need to be connecting with to make sure that we're bringing the political process closer to the people and not the other way around. And so for us, in this moment when we're talking about all that we have gone through in this state, all that we've gone through in the South, and the aspects of the determinants of health and our environmental freedoms, there is a definite need to make sure that we're in lockstep alignment with all the organizations that are trying to get the government, and also making sure that government understands that there's an accountability measure. From a C3 side, there's still accountability. From a C4 side, there's accountability. And then there's the people accountability. And so in order to make sure that partnership is leveraged in the right way, we try to stand with community in spaces where we can leverage the conversation to the betterment of community to build that systemic change that we need.
Thank you. I'm gonna actually ask one follow-up question, and I promise you I wasn't gonna do that, but I'm sorry, I'm gonna ask one quick follow-up question. And it's only because we have federal folks in the room, and I think they need to hear and sit with the realities around preemption and like how it is landing. You talked about being able and the need to elevate the civil society in order to organize the faith and the academic institutions in order to battle. But I want you to like maybe talk a little bit about
Absolutely.
what's playing itself out.
North Carolina just celebrated the passage of Medicaid expansion in a real way, right? That is something to celebrate. We can clap for that. The reason why people didn't automatically clap is because we were 40th in the nation to pass it. And you think about the 13 to 14 years that we didn't have one step closer towards universal health care, which is what the goal is, right? It's the North Star. How many lives have we lost? How many people have not been able to thrive and survive? How many rural hospitals have been shut down? When we talk about this 2023 election cycle, this was a referendum on a lot of different things that have happened nationally, but people understand in North Carolina that there's still an imagination of a black elected class of people that can get elected. And the local level was where we saw a number of black mayors being elected into office. And by and large, a lot of those mayors are not going to be able to be effective because their power is being stripped away in a real way. I think about anybody here from Cumberland County, southeastern part of the state. There's a mayor there named Kia Anthony that has been battling the state for almost as long as she's been in office because the individual powers that be in the governmental offices they have the city under receivership, basically. They're not able to even use their own budget. They are a majority black city, and just because you're a black city doesn't mean you legislate for everybody. As a matter of fact, you legislate for everybody. That's why when black women win, everybody wins. But in this case, we are seeing that, I stand on that, when we, especially in 2024, when we end up talking about this conversation around preemption, we have to understand that black communities and black cities and towns in the South have been under preemption since Reconstruction, right? Just this notion of being denied access to health care is one example, but we see education being in the front lines. North Carolina has a $6 billion surplus. We have enough money to educate properly each and every single student. They don't want to educate each and every single student. And so they are denying our ability to use our tax dollars that go in to fund these public institutions, and they're funneling that money directly into private institutions that are unregulated. And I'll say this too, I know that we have to be educated in different spaces. There's public schools, there's private schools, there's charter schools. The fact of the matter is, anything outside of a public school is a private school. And your dollars, if you want to send your kids to private school, that's fine. If you want to have an alternate means of education. I understand why we need that. But that doesn't mean the dollars, my dollars, go to that alternative, right? But our city government, they're not stepping up and talking about Leandro or talking about the access to education. That's what I'm talking about, Mel. All right, now we got we got a whole panel. Leandro is a state lawsuit that unpacked the reality that students in rural parts of the state, even though the Constitution says we should all be equally educated, students in the rural part of the state aren't able to have the same resources in their public schools as some of these urban areas. And there's a huge divide, more so between the lines of race, but also between the lines of socioeconomic status that dictates that these rural communities should have the same quality schools that our urban areas have, but because of the intervention of our government, the government controls our public education, the resources are doled out disproportionately to our rural areas. And so this lawsuit was 30 years ago, and North Carolina was found guilty of not following its constitutional mandate. And that's when the Democrats were in control. We do. We have one of the plaintiffs in the room, and we have one of the original attorneys in the room in the back here. I want to just shout, just wave your hand. I don't want to take up too much more time. So when we talk about preemption and why it's important for nonprofit organizations, NGOs, foundations to work together in this moment, we have to unplug the hole. What they said they wanted to drain the swamp. Well, now the drain is clogged. We got to unclog this drain and make sure that we're bringing elected officials closer to the people, and then we push to make sure that the systems of government that are not being responsive, that are trying to deny control, that are trying to deny our right to invest in ourselves properly, that they are stopped at every single way, from the city council meeting all the way to the ballot box.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. And what is key and what I want you folks to hold is that in order to be able to unplug what's stuck,
Unplug the drain.
Unplug the drain, it is going to be necessary for the civil societies, the civic infrastructure that needs to be built to be able to do that. One of the key actors that are playing in that has been philanthropy. In a state like Florida, we see a similar situation where a governor may not want to receive these dollars or potentially be a barrier. David's institution is an example of like what is possible as philanthropy leans into being part of that civic infrastructure that's necessary to move the money.
Hi everyone, I'm David Bender. I'm the Director of Grants at Pinellas Community Foundation. So we're a foundation in Florida that focuses on raising funds and then granting them out to Pinellas County. If you know St. Pete or Clearwater, those are two cities within our county. We really got involved with moving federal resources at the onset of the pandemic with the CARES Act, which we all kind of forget about, but that was a huge flush all at once down to the local level, and our county allocated, we got $18 million out the door in 4 months with food, behavioral health, and legal aid. And that was a result of innovation at our county level saying, we can't do this, let's bring in the folks who can. There was one success story, an organization with $100,000 annual operating budget got $600,000 of funding, and they spent it in 5 or 6 months. So that's the kind of innovation that can happen when the dollars are driven directly to the local level. So I don't have as much experience with dealing with preemption, but I do know that the local to federal pipeline is incredibly important to keep strengthening. Currently, we have some ongoing American Rescue Plan Act programs ranging from everything from major construction to mental health hubs. The flexibility and creativity that is emerging from these resources is just incredible. And I think we really have to just keep hammering home the importance of the power of local, because that's where community is. And I think local government is also not used to the messiness of community, to conflicts within and between communities. And I think that's where philanthropy, when they behave themselves, can serve a role, because philanthropy can perpetuate harm just as well as systems, the other systems can. And so that's what I've really been focused on doing, is bringing down those barriers. We've had capacity building assistance going on, because part of that difficulty with applying is just getting an application together. So helping them through and making sure that perhaps the people administering the program are not the decision makers. That's something we've really emphasized as well. And one of the benefits of going so local is that the decision makers can look like the community they come from and know the community. And so I don't make any decisions. I said that in the last session. But the people who do, we put together committees that have made impactful decisions based on their knowledge and their lived experience. I think that covers a lot of what I was going to say. I really want to encourage folks to keep strengthening the local pipeline for these resources because that's what will make the difference.
Thanks. So thank you for that. And the one thing that I want to reflect a little bit on is that we talked about earlier, and we've tried to hit home, is like the majority of these resources will go through the state. I just want to keep saying that. So when we talk about $1, 90 cents goes to the state, and that's baked in by law. Like there's no way to navigate that. But I want you to sit, this is a moment of abundance. I will take 10% of $4 trillion. And what that then looks like is that you have the federal actors who have looked at other pipelines to be able to move those resources, whether to moving them to a local government, whether it's moving it to potentially philanthropy or other actors that can get the money straight to community, or even directly to community. But one of the things that historically has been baked in is the ability for those dollars to flow to utilities. So whether it's on the energy side, the water side, or the transportation side, utilities often have access to these resources. And specifically in the South, we've seen those dollars being able to flow through the energy utilities, like the rural electric co-ops. So the question I have for Ajulo is really thinking about how have you seen this as an opportunity to be able to leverage resources, especially given, just so you guys know, one of the things that came out of the IRA dollars as well as the bill dollars was there was $10 billion that was set aside for rural electric co-ops. And the way that that is set up is that it is to go to community in a way to benefit community. So the question is, how have you sort of navigated that or created systems that allow for us to actually leverage the co-ops in a way that actually serves community?
So I'll just say as a initial response that it's still unfolding. There is no tried and true solution at this point. There are just a couple of examples that I think we can point to. But sometimes when I'm in these spaces, and I think we have the luxury of being in this space where we can hold together the notions of freedom and justice alongside tax credits. And that
I see what you did. I
you see that?
You go do the
I'm
tax
gonna
credit
do
thing.
a
You
tax
go. Okay,
credit
go.
thing. But that's just kind of where we are. And in my work, one of the things that I'm increasingly coming to is that I'm less focused on transformation. I think that my faith actually, we will transform without a doubt. So the work that I do now is more about material well-being and about wealth creation. And this is a massive transfer of wealth. The question is, transfer to whom? It's from us, we know, as taxpayer dollars. The question is, who's going to take advantage of that money on the back end, whether it's the states. At the end of the day, it's private enterprise. And if we're not thinking about a Wall Street, a black Wall Street, a minority Wall Street in every single corner of this country, then we are missing the point in a lot of ways. This transformation is not just about a technology transformation. It's not just about solar or wind or decarbonization through renewable technologies. We are in the middle of a systems change. And we have the opportunity to actually have broad-based, distributed wealth creation. These dollars do not necessarily need to be concentrated in the hands of a few. Let's figure out how we can work together to make sure that that does not happen. That is the mandate of B.O.S.S, so it's Black Owners of Solar Services. We have this cooperative agreement with the Department of Energy out of their equity office. And we have one goal, which is to create, B.O.S.S has one goal, which is to create more minority-owned businesses. And we measure that in two ways. Are there more businesses that are minority-owned, and are they making more money? It's just that simple. And while I think last week I said I wish there was some grand vision that I could share, but it is ultimately about money. I wish that I could be more inspiring in that regard. And the reason why is because I have the benefit of living on land that's been in my family for 6 generations. It's been there since pre-Civil War, and how enslaved people actually acquired and held on to land to this day is a mystery. But what's not a mystery to me is that it is a source of generational wealth. Amen. That I'm privileged to be able to draw from. And the stripping of wealth over these centuries as a part of being, in exchange for our citizenship, actually, for many of us, is something that we can turn around potentially through this process. So understanding that this is an ownership opportunity, in very simple terms, solar energy, for instance, or wind energy, it's an opportunity for us to generate our own power. So the big elephant not in the room, or should be in the room, that's not in the room, it's the utilities, back to your original question, right? And not only are the utilities not in the room, but they are in some ways actively not wanting you to be in the room. Because this is an opportunity for you to learn that 30% of tax credits can go towards paying for you to power your own home. And if you live in a certain community, you can actually get more in tax credits for that. And then there'll actually be low-cost financing to help you finance that. And so the idea of this generating your own power, owning the means of production, this is a shift. And I guarantee that there are folks in rooms like this within utilities who are thinking about what they're going to do 50 years from now, because they won't be able to sell you power in the same way that they're doing today. There are a set of utilities who are a bit more forward-thinking, or at least can be influenced to be more forward-thinking if they aren't currently, and those are the rural electric cooperatives. There are 900 of them across the country, and they represent, many of them work in the most persistently poor counties in our country, most of them in the Southeast. So if you're not in your rural electric cooperative territory, you're somewhere nearby rural electric cooperative territory. They are governed by, first of all, they're owned. Ownership is key to this equation. They are owned by their customers. So their shareholders are their customers. That means that their governing body is represented from their customer base, as opposed to some BlackRock somewhere in some other place. So the ability to influence a rural electric cooperative is a lot stronger for us than an investor-owned utility. If you're in a rural electric cooperative or a municipal electric utility, think of it more as an opportunity for doing some of this work. Now, there are barriers, but part of what we're trying to do is to figure out solutions within the constraints. because we are in constrained regulatory markets in the Southeast. One of the proposals that I'm talking more about is cooperatively owned solar generation. So you see solar farms all over the place popping up. What if that solar farm were owned by 100 low-income people? They get a check from producing electricity that's sold to the utility. We're not asking you to change any rules. This is within the constraints. Each of those folks get a check for as long as that solar farm is producing electricity. 35, 40 years, one generation to the next. We can do it.
Oh, you get to. Oh. So I did not have a follow-up, but I see people mouthing, how do we do that? So that may be the follow-up. The follow-up is, as we imagine how to leverage the utilities, what could be the blueprint that we collectively organize around to make that happen?
It just starts by, I think, asking the question. You see solar farms everywhere. This starts with the land. Is the land suitable? Is it near the point of interconnection? Then it's asking the question about, well, what is the price of power? How much can I sell this for? And working through the financial model, and all the federal folks that were here and not over there, they will answer your question. They will build your financial model for you. The National Community Solar Partnership was one of the workshops. Mm-hmm. All you do is give them a call and say, I have an idea. Can you help me figure out what the gaps are? And they will work through the project modeling, the financing for it, and at least begin to help you ask the questions. And then, of course, there are networks that you can connect with. This is an amazing community, relationships. So there's definitely a way to get started.
You see people taking notes.
You know, I started this work in 2017, and it was based on the fact that I had been doing rural development before then, and a set of relationships with the North Carolina Resourceful Communities Program, with Self-Help Ventures Fund, with the Mary Reynolds Babcock Foundation. All those relationships that we're building here today and bring to bear, those are the things that you can reach back to, because this is the moment we're in, and I think everyone is interested in not missing this moment.
Thank you. No, perfect. I'm gonna say this loud, because remember, Grace, that was great. Thank you. What I'm sitting with as I hear the panel and as we transition to our government partner is relationships have been key, and the need for us to organize, to build, even though you were talking about electric power, our collective power is important. But the thing that I hold from just some of the conversations in the room is I'm in Jackson, and I've been given resources, and the state has gotten resources, I still can't touch it. Or I'm in, I forget the town in Alabama, Pritchard, they're about to turn off my water. Folks know that that's wrong, but I don't know who to get to. So the question that I'd love to ask is, how do we think about and what are the ways to activate accountability and oversight from the feds when we have people who are institutions and governments that are blatant around not supporting community?
Well, where to begin? Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Irene, Marion. I use she, her pronouns. I am serving as the director of the Departmental Office of Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Transportation. And I come to this role and this work as a baby of the nature island of the Caribbean, Dominica, as a child groomed in Black Portland, Oregon, and as an activist who never thought I would be in the government space, but on the theme of transformation, recognized that some of us got to be inside doing the things and understanding the things so that we can help to facilitate the change inside of these organizations. And the thing I want to open with is thinking about the battleground for a lot of the civil rights work that we have as legal frameworks. The battleground has been transportation. When you think about the marches and the protests, the legal minds, the academic scholars who got us to the place of having laws that should be protecting our communities against discrimination with the use of federal dollars, many of the legal origins and those legal battles were bus boycotts, Pullman Porter union issues. There are so many things that we can recall that all kind of come back to the transportation space. So that is a part of what I carry in this work, but a part of what we have our secretary speaking to when he talks about the freeways being racist. And has to go and speak to that and respond to that to members of Congress who want to call him out for it, but who can, we have a secretary that can articulate that history, but also remind them that we are responsible for ensuring that federal dollars do not contribute to that harm moving forward. So as we talk about all these executive orders that are very exciting for the federal government to be moving through and facilitating right now under this very specific administration, calling us and holding us as political appointees accountable to this work, we need to remember that the legal frameworks for all of this equity work come back to civil rights laws. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VI, Title VII, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Rehabilitation Act, language access work, all of those come back to legal frameworks, and every organization facilitating any programmatic activity with federal dollars signs contracts, assurances with federal agencies that they will not use these funding to perpetuate discrimination. We need to understand that, we need to remember that, and we need to really carry that as a set of tools as we're moving through the different ways that we are trying to facilitate transformation in the different systems that we're functioning within. And then there's federal appropriations, which are also a vehicle that creates the programs, that create new opportunities, that reinforce programs like the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, which create opportunities for us to build wealth, but are constant opportunities for Congress to reassure us that they're keeping these legal frameworks in mind. So we have dozens of executive orders that really have given this administration a focused approach, but it's really that all of the cabinet members and us as political appointees are in here doing the work to ensure that civil rights is the front and center of the work. So it's been very exciting to work for Secretary Pete Buttigieg and to be called by him to co-lead all of the equity work as Civil Rights Director in the department. So I do that in partnership with Christopher Coase, who you've heard from, you'll hear from again today. So that means the Assistant Secretary for Transportation Policy and the Civil Rights Director in the Office of the Secretary are co-designing how we are activating all of these executive orders from these civil rights legal frameworks and trying to revitalize and transform a federal agency to ensure that, A, we are creating different levels of transparency into what we're facilitating and how we're facilitating, everything from making more data available to you to ensuring that you know who should you be reaching out to, how do you get information about the different types of enforcement activities that we're facilitating. And what does that look like? So we call ourselves a federated organization. We have the Office of the Secretary, but we have different parts of the organization representing different modal elements of transportation, the Federal Aviation Administration, FTA, et cetera. Each of those has a civil rights office, and the civil rights office in the different modes of transportation are responsible for ensuring that they are holding our funding recipients accountable to the requirements of these civil rights laws. So some things that I want you to be aware of and start to get to know and look into. First is In the Title VI space, we have a new secretarial order as of 2021 calling for every funding recipient of the Department of Transportation to submit a Title VI plan to the department, and a new requirement of a community participation plan so that we can see evidence of not just at the project level engagement of the public, but we want to know how are you building out the practice of bringing community into decision-making processes so that by the time you are submitting a discretionary grant application, we already have confidence that you're engaging community. Now, that's a new practice for us. We're working towards it, but I want you to hold those local folks accountable. You should know what is in their Title VI plan. Have you all as community partners blessed that? Do you have confidence in your state DOT to be able to facilitate the plans that they have even set forth for their Title VI work? And do you validate what they have said that they're facilitating in their community participation plan? We have things like requirements for ADA transition plans. So we actually have a new map that we just released from the Federal Highway Administration this week, where if you're in the disability space or you want to ensure that infrastructure is as accessible as possible, we can now, as a department, tell you whether or not your state has submitted an ADA transition plan to the Federal Highway Administration. And the data is available to you so that you can see what is the infrastructure network look like, how accessible is it, what is the state or transit agency doing to advance disability access from an infrastructure perspective and prioritizing resources to go into that work. So there are many things that we're collecting to have on record. There are ways that we are doing technical assistance out to our funding recipients to ensure that they have the strongest plans and a programmatic approach as possible. But if you don't have confidence that they're doing the right things, we want to hear that also. And we have mechanisms for the public to be able to complain to the Department of Transportation directly so that we can assess, is there an element of discrimination that we need to investigate and see what is going on there and create either mitigation strategies or potentially pull back federal fundings if we have concerns about how the funding is going to be used. So complaint processes for accessibility on the basis of discrimination based on disability, but also Title VI are vehicles for community to communicate to us, hey, you just funded a project, it's about to dislocate or all of these houses, all of these businesses, we have these concerns. We're not seeing mitigation. We're not getting funding. There's not language access built into how they're even communicating these displacements to the residents that are impacted. So the complaints and investigations process is really where we lean in to
Irene,
understand
may I ask
things.
a quick question, just in case folks don't know what Title VI is. Can you give a little,
So
couple of sentences?
the Civil Rights Act and Title VI is really about discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin. So for the folks in this room and the communities that we support, that's our people. Some other things I want to call out is public engagement, which all of our civil rights statutes include some element of public engagement requirement. And so you'll see us leaning into a lot of messaging around our funding recipients having obligations to include in meaningful ways public into decision-making processes. So we're trying to lead by example. I shouted out yesterday and remind you that this evening we're hosting a meeting of our Federal Advisory Committee on Transportation Equity, a public advisory committee that we have established for the Secretary to receive recommendations. But those types of advisory committees exist, and we want to make sure that they are representative of community voice, that you all are engaging with them, offering recommendations, sitting in those seats. And we will continue to, again, through our Title VI work, our public engagement work, hold our funding recipients accountable for creating those meaningful opportunities. Related to I think the season that we're in and the work that we're doing, we really want to make sure that we're making as much of information available to you as possible. So Stephanie has done a good job, and Helen and others have had PowerPoints, kind of quick shots to websites and things that you need to know. I'll make sure that I'm coordinating with them to make other things available. So like that map of whether or not your state has an ADA transition plan, information on how to submit a Title VI or an ADA complaint to the department, but also other maps like or other information that's flowing from our Equity Action Plan. So our Equity Action Plan is a new federal requirement of all of our federal agencies where we're now creating an annual Equity Action Plan that is our organizational commitments and that where we're trying to build out some transparency around, like, what are we actually trying to facilitate under all of this executive order work. So an example of that is we had a focus on assessing whether or not our funding recipients, and specifically state DOTs and metropolitan planning organizations, are they using some type of equity analysis in their decision making on the formula dollars that are coming into their state. And we released the results of that this week. Only 3 out of 52 state DOTs have applied some type of equity criterion on how they're using congressional formula dollars from the Department of Transportation.
Can you say what 3?
3.
What can you say? What?
You know
3?
what, 3?
I didn't pull them for it. I'm sorry. But we'll get that to you. And then of all of the MPOs, 42 out of 214, so 20% of the MPOs who are spending all of these, 90% of all of this federal funding, 20% of those MPOs have some type of equity criteria in their decision making. So while we're trying to facilitate a whole lot from the federal level, these are the types of things that we want to build some transparency into so that you can ask, does my state have an equity criterion? If not, if so, what does that look like? And do we agree with it as community partners? And if not, how are we going to get them there? So we're trying to create dashboards and other things that just make information available to you all. But this advisory committee on transportation equity is important because while we think we have good ideas, and a lot of ideas have been sitting on the shelf in our departments, and certainly we're coming in as political appointees and trying to drive this agenda forward, we know that there are so many other ways that we can be supporting you as activists on the grounds, as facilitators in your community. And so where you need more information, both about the civil rights work, but also about how you can really get what you need to be the right kind of advocates in your community, we certainly want to be a resource to you. Lastly, I'm going to give you a to-do list. So the first thing...
I like how everybody got a pen. They were like, oh. Okay.
So a thing I would certainly encourage you to do is to get to know the civil rights director at your state DOT. You should know their name. You should know how many people are on their team and what their jobs are. You should know what are they trying to facilitate. You should know their Title VI plan. You should know their community participation plan. You should be familiar with their engagement.
Irene, at the highest level, because in real time we're talking this through, does the U.S. Department of Transportation have a list of who all of those entities are so we could aggregate that information and give it back out?
So because they're not our employees, I don't know that we would give that out.
Okay.
But there is a network called AASHTO, which is the American Association of State Transportation Officials, which is the convening organization of all of the state DOTs, and they have a civil rights committee.
Okay.
And so there could be a request to them to make sure that that roster of information is available.
Thank you, very helpful.
Of
Thank
course.
you. Off the record, of course, but very helpful. Okay.
The other thing I would flag is, cities and counties especially have a lot of new equity positions. And so similarly, if your transit agency, your state DOT, or other entities that are receiving these federal dollars, get to know their equity staff. And I was an equity manager at the City of Portland Bureau of Transportation. And as that city person, I was the one responsible for our civil rights work. Whether or not I had all the tools I needed for it, that's a whole other thing. But get to know those staff because they are there to be the resource to you, but they may not have the resources they need to facilitate the work. So you need to get to know what are their obstacles in their organization, what have they been recommending up to leadership, what are the pressures they're experiencing, is any of the money that's flowing into their organization even resourcing them to get more staff to do the things. Those are the types of things that are going to be especially helpful to you all. I would create like an annual calendar of all the public meeting spaces that are the forums where a lot of the local decisions are being made, especially around these formula dollars. Which are the tables? What's the MPO meeting schedule? Who's going to be at the meeting? Who's going to read the notes? Who's going to send the letters? All of those are pivotal moments, and that's just my organizing hat. Like, those are the forums that matter on the formula dollars that we can't have as the same type of direct influence on, but the things that you should be tracking locally. Make sure that you have the link to where to submit your complaints. It can always come into my office and we will route it wherever it needs to go, but you should have that bookmarked for federal highways, federal transit, federal aviation, all of these federal agencies who are have the obligation to receive those complaints and process them, and that's what I hold them accountable to. But you should have those links bookmarked so that you can always feel free to submit information. It may not land in an actual discrimination investigation, but it will at least get addressed, and you want to make sure that you are familiar with that process. And then lastly, at least at the federal level, follow this advisory committee. It is so critical that we have a group like this creating recommendations, but they're really trying to create space for you all to submit ideas to them so that they can be a vehicle to be sharing, lifting up your voice and your needs and your concerns and your ideas. But there are several other types of transportation equity advisory committees that have popped up around the country, and I want to make sure that you all are, again, mapping out who are those tables, who's at those tables, what's their schedule like, and how are you going to engage with them and use that as a vehicle to provide input.
Thank you very much. So much appreciation on that last piece, sort of navigating like the systems. A couple things to hold, because Irene was speaking to Department of Transportation. Every federal agency has a civil rights office. So hold that. This is not unique to Department of Transportation. AASHTO, because I heard on the side over here, they were like, what? So AASHTO stands for the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. And that's sort of like a association or a network. So that's when Irene was saying, like, we can get that information from them. And then metropolitan planning organizations, which are NPOs. So this sort of goes back up to a higher level. What we were talking about is that the state will get the resources, and then there will be entities that have the ability to influence those dollars. One such entity is a metropolitan planning organization, and they determine how money flow within a county or at the local level. And a lot of times, the thing that I'm holding for this group, because we had a land conversation earlier, I need you to see that the Department of Transportation is not just a transportation entity. They are, at the federal level, a lot of times, the land use entity like USDA. So just to hold those pieces.